Welcome to the Talking Toughness series of podcasts, where we examine the mental toughness concept with guests from a wide range of sectors, illustrating that our mental approach to what happens to us and around us matters for all of us. Our guests come from the worlds of business and public service, education, social mobility, sport, and health. They all share their experiences and their observations about the factors that have enabled them to survive and to thrive on their journey through life. Many guests have gone further and incorporated the concept into what they do as coaches, trainers, managers, and leaders, helping others to thrive in their turn. Their experiences are valuable to those of us who strive to do the same. Good morning, John. How are you? How's life on the west coast of Ireland?
Lovely, actually, Doug. Yeah, really nice. Plenty of nice golf courses to be had. So I'm always happy if that's the case. How about yourself?
Oh, well, very similar here, but we've had a nice break in the weather. We've had rain and we've been waiting for rain because my garden has gone very Middle Eastern. So much needed.
As long as the putting greens are okay, then I don't mind. Who
Well,
do we have with us today, Doug?
Well, today we've got a very good friend of ours. We've got Paul Lyons. And just to give the listeners a little bit of a background, Paul has got a long history and background in senior leader recruitment and senior leader development. Originally from the UK, but Paul is now a confirmed Aussie. He was, or his career has included being Asia Pacific MD for Michael Page International. And then he co-founded and was Group CEO for the Ambition Group, which is a major international recruitment group. Now, those two sets of experiences have simply given him a fantastic set of connections, which gives him a superb insight into how large organizations work. But since, I guess, about 8-10 years ago, he's developed what we would call a portfolio career. He's an executive coach, and in 2016, he founded Mental Toughness Partners, which, as you might guess, is very much focused on the mental toughness concept. And Paul is now a member of the advisory board for mental toughness research and development globally. And I guess that kind of makes Paul one of our most valuable colleagues and partners. So we're delighted to welcome Paul. How are you, Paul?
Very well, thanks, Doug, particularly after those kind words. Thank you.
Did I miss anything?
No, you put a few things in, but I was very happy to hear that.
Yeah. Well, I could have mentioned Manchester United this morning, given that they've just beaten Liverpool, but we'll leave that for another podcast.
That's right.
So I suppose we could kick off, Paul, because you've had this really interesting background and career, and then you've kind of begun to make mental toughness a big part of your life. What took you to mental toughness? How did you come across it?
Well, you mentioned 8 to 10 years, and it's actually 8 years since we started talking, Doug. And I came across mental toughness because I've had I don't know where the Queen's annus horribilis was, but mine were a couple of years, 2013, 2014. And as you mentioned, I'd had a corporate career that had been an amazing adventure, 25 years in those two organizations, and just got on the wrong side of an independent chairman. We didn't see eye to eye, and I became unemployed, which was a really interesting experience, and interesting probably meaning a really unpleasant experience. And I had to try and understand who I was, because very quickly I realized that I'd just become defined by my job and who I was expected to be. And then without that job and without that responsibility or range of responsibilities and adventures, I wasn't sure who I was. So I spent, thankfully with the support of my family, quite a bit of time, months, just trying to work out what had happened, why it had happened, who I was, all of those, trying to answer those questions, and came across MTQ48 as it was then, Doug, and that was a framework that really started to help me with my, I suppose, self-awareness, my reflection. And I was drawn to it, I think, because it started to address intangible qualities that I've been working with kind of all my professional career. So things like, confidence, drive, motivation, empathy, lots of elements. And I was fascinated by the way that the measure and the framework kind of address those. So that was probably 2014. And that helped me personally, and also helped me, interestingly, sort of reframe what had happened, but also my career as well. And then over a period of years, I think you and I started to get closer. My hometown of Stockport, just down the road from Global HQ in Chester. And I became more and more interested in coaching and mentoring and advising other, particularly business owners. And I felt that the mental toughness framework was a really important part of that, because it helped my clients, and it helped me better understand why they were thinking the way they were, and perhaps give them a pathway to to some clarity or to some sort of resolve. So that's probably a long answer to a short question, but that's probably why I came across, and when I came across, the mental toughness framework. And it is 7 or 8 years ago now, and it seems to have flown by.
That's a fantastic answer. It's a brilliant answer, Paul. To be honest, I didn't know that. And I've known you for so long. It just shows you how much we still have to learn about each other. But, I mean, John will confirm this. It resonates with so many of the other stories we hear in the other podcasts, especially when we talk to athletes whose careers will often come to an end in a similarly abrupt fashion, where they just can't keep up anymore, or there's an injury, and you have to take stock of who you are.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly where I was. I think it's the Jack Welch, face reality as it is, not the way, not what you thought it used to be or what you'd like it to be, something like that. And it's a great quote, because I think that's what I was facing, and I had to somehow get to the bottom of the challenge I had.
And now that you're involved in the sort of coaching, personal development side of things, Paul, how useful do you think it is for someone in those roles, in a coaching role, to have had some sort of personal experience, or at least being able to understand themselves and how they manage certain situations, to be able to offer those kind of services?
I'm biased, obviously, so I can't say for everybody, but I think for me, and hopefully my clients, it helps, because first of all, it creates some kind of credibility, because they understand perhaps where I've come from, and therefore some trust. And from my side, I can fairly quickly have a genuine empathy and understanding of where they're coming from and where they want to get to. And I think with the clients I have, and it obviously doesn't work with everyone, there's always some people you don't have connection with, but I think it helps me knowing or feeling I know what they're going through, because I've been there myself. And the one thing I would say is, particularly in the early days, because when I was in a leadership role, I think I have loads of weaknesses, but one of my strengths probably was that I would coach people, and that was my style of leadership. And one of the things I've had to really try hard not to do is advise people on the solution. I've had to really try and work on asking more questions, listening more than perhaps telling them the answer, which perhaps I think I know, but it's not my job to tell people, unless sometimes I'm in an advisory capacity with a recruitment business owner, for example, where they are definitely wanting my advice in a certain situation. But for the most part, I'm there to ask the questions and lead people down a path.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to pick up on that, because I suppose that's the flip side of the experience. Is you get ahead of yourself and you think, I'll tell you what worked for me. This is what you should do.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's also like I like kind of what you were saying there. I'm reminded of a colleague from work who trains clinical psychologists will always tell people to don't just stick with education the whole way. At some point, go away and get some life experience before you finish your training, because like you can learn cognitive behavioral therapy and you can learn various tools. Your main tool, though, is you. You're the main tool, and you use these kind of complementary tools, including using mental toughness, to be able to sort of supplement your own kind of advices and insights and those kind of things. So I just think it's a really interesting sort of consideration for people who are looking to develop people.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take you back to that aha moment where you found that mental toughness works for you. What then made you want to develop a career or a business around the theme? That's quite a big step to take.
It was a big step because I suppose the safe thing to do would have been to just start another recruitment company. That was something that I knew I could do. I could have done it just on my own, or I could have got backing. I had quite a few opportunities to do that. But out of a sense of loyalty to the people I'd worked with, out of a sense of feeling that ambition was, the place. I didn't feel I had a point to prove either. There wasn't an element of bitter regret or revenge, or I just felt that I wanted to do something new. And it's interesting when you sort of reflect on your life. But one of the things for me that's been a constant, I think, is there's been this trade-off between exploration, exploitation, so adventure and doing new things, which obviously now I see as our risk orientation, and then the trade-off with doing what you're doing, do it well. So that's the achievement orientation, and this the exploitation of the opportunity you've got. And I think so for me, there was this pull towards doing something new, and therefore it was more likely to be coaching and advisory. It was more likely to be using what I thought were my strengths, which were the softer skills. And I had started to, as we talked more and more, had a real interest in mental toughness, and the fact that it's and this is one of the exciting things about the framework now, is that it's a living, growing framework. The more we use it, personally, and I think as a group of practitioners, the more we understand about its power and its scope. So I think I was going through that 7 or 8 years ago, being excited by the possibility and the opportunity, and the fact also that in Australia and Southeast Asia, not enough people know about mental toughness and the framework, and so that's a great opportunity as well. That's exciting to be able to somehow tell the world, in this part of the world, about what it is and what it can do.
Thank you. That's But I love what you say there. I could almost hear myself speaking then. It's the same elements for me. It's been the excitement of the journey and then trying to get a message out to the world at large. You know, we started a little bit before you and nobody knew what we were talking about. And people didn't even want to stop and listen. But bit by bit, achievement orientation kicks in and you begin to get there. But you've been a big part of that, Paul. How do you think the mental toughness story is being received in Australia, if not the wider Southeast Asia context?
I think, and when you and I have talked about this many times, it's about making a noise. And I would say that people that we talk to collectively, as mental toughness practitioners, more often than not get a really positive reaction from the people they're talking to about many elements. So the framework, the fact that it's evidence based, which I don't think we can underplay, because I think people increasingly these days, or certainly in this part of the world, want the truth, not the spin. And we've got a framework that is the truth, not the spin, in terms of its evidence base. It's gender neutral. It's contemporary. It's really deceptively simple to understand and communicate. So there's so many elements of it that that people, once they start to use it, they really like what it can give them. And I think that this probably isn't part of the question, but I think a couple of years ago, I misunderstood the framework, thinking of it perhaps in a more narrow definition of being measuring your state of mind and your strength of mind. And now it's just much wider than that. It's I think it's I've come to understand that you can be mentally sensitive or mentally tough or somewhere in between. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is you understand who you are and why you think the way that you do, and that's the starting point. So I think when we talk to people, they really get quite excited about that, and that we're not trying to push them down in a certain direction. So again, no long answer, but I think the more people we talk to, the more people are getting excited by the measure, and I think it's only a matter of time before we get a real lift off in terms of use and in terms of people talking about the measure and wanting to be part of it.
Thanks for that, Paul. And I wonder, could you give us a sort of specific example, if you like? You don't necessarily have to mention companies or something like that, but to give people a flavour of what you might actually do when you're working with a particular company, in terms of, presumably there's an assessment, but how might you then kind of turn that assessment into something that's going to change mindsets and behaviours?
Certainly I can. There's a number of scenarios, John, as you know, it could be a selection exercise. It's invariably some kind of development exercise, which might be connected to a cultural change or leadership change or some sort of event. And really, I think the power in the framework is generally got to have a starting point. So it's where we're engaged, we're generally talking to the individual or a group of individuals. Often it's the leadership team about an event or a situation, and the fact that we want to understand what the individuals and the cohorts, where they're at from a mindset perspective. And that's where the measure comes in, because it gives us a starting point, and then it provides some really useful information, again individually, but also as a cohort, in terms of the way the group might be, in terms of the way that they think, and then therefore the way that they behave. So in terms of how that actually practically works, you tend to have an initial presentation and give people an idea of what we're trying to do, why the measure is important. We get the measure, we then get the results, and then we analyse results. And if it's with a leadership team, we'll be analysing the group results together, perhaps, or often. But the individual results, often that might be a one-to-one kind of session or a series of sessions. If it's with me, and really what we're trying to do is, I suppose, understand what the starting point is, and once we understand that individually and as a group, then where is it we want to get to, and why do we want to get there? And that's an easier process to take if you know where you're starting from, you know. And I think reflecting back again to my career, many times I would hair off in a direction and I didn't actually know where I was starting from. So hey presto, I got to the wrong place. And I think I see that with some of my clients. They make so many assumptions about what they should do without understanding where they actually are now.
And I think it's really interesting, the bit where you talk about a leadership team there and doing it as a group session. I could see some value then if you had a supportive kind of culture where there was trust, where essentially what matters from a leadership group, of course, is the collective. And so recognizing where actually there might be sensitivities that are sort of, I suppose, are you able then to unpick how the group might be able to become a bit more synergous, you know, rather than everybody just ploughing on regardless?
You are, and you picked up a good point. I mean, I was thinking of one particular client that's, to be fair, I think they're a positive group, but there would be other groups where you've got some really deep divisions between individuals who think different ways and who aren't going to come together in a group session because there are, you know, egos present and long-standing differences and what have you. So that's a little more difficult to achieve. So you quite possibly have to just try and do that a different way. You might do it the same way, but you'd have to do a lot of background work with individuals one-on-one to get them to see what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Paul, you placed a great deal of emphasis, and we like that, on using the MTQ measures alongside the framework. How important do you think it is to use the measures to optimize the framework?
Look, I think it's really important. I think if you're going to use the framework without the measures, you're missing a huge part of the value, because you're not getting the starting point with any accuracy. I think the benefit of the measure is it just really just says, and particularly when you've had the reflection and the conversation, this is where I am, this is where I start. With the framework only, you can take a guess at that, but it's a guess. So I would always encourage our clients to use the measure. Otherwise, they're probably not going to get the results that they want. And
that I think when you say guesswork there, Paul, that's exactly the idea of what we're trying to do. We call it a psychometric or psychological assessment, not opinion. I'm not asking someone's opinion of, do you think that you're mentally tough? Do you think that you're good at controlling your emotions? And it's interesting then, because there's a clear difference sometimes between assessment and opinion, because sometimes people are surprised by their results, right? And you sort of go, well, I'm surprised because I thought I was really confident. And I think, well, it's just when you were asked a question about that, you marked 2 out of 5 or 3 out of 5. So you couldn't have been that much. And do you find that happens quite regularly, where someone might be a little bit surprised by their report?
I'm surprised it doesn't happen more, actually, John, which is part of the, I suppose, the quality of the psychometric. But but it does happen. It rarely happens with the overall score. But I'll come back to that because there's a situation where it does happen. But it sometimes happens with a particular subscale. But actually, that's not a bad thing because you can still have the conversation. Still, the conversation is valid around if it's not you, why is it not you? And then you have a conversation as to why they think I should be a 7 on confidence and abilities, not a 4. No, that's fine. Well, let's just unpack that and talk about why you feel that. And it may just be that on that day they answered the question in such a way to give them a 4, not a 7. But the value for me is having had that conversation with them about the situations that would make them think that they're a 7 and why that's important, or a 4. So it does happen, but not very often. But I don't mind actually when it does. Where occasionally we find situations that are interesting are where you get a mental toughness score and all the subscales of a 9 or a 10, pretty much uniform. And of course, that could either be someone who's really mentally tough and self-aware, or it can be somebody who thinks they ought to be mentally tough and has a score out of 10. And so I've had some really interesting conversations, not many, but a few, where I've had a discussion with an individual and said it's not out of 10, and actually being a 10 has as many potential challenges as it might have advantages. Can we talk about those? And then when you start to talk, most times when you start to talk to the individual, you realize that they've put themselves in a mindset to answer it to get a 10. And again, you get a really interesting conversation. It does raise some ethical issues, but it does create a compelling conversation with an individual about where they're at and why they did what they did. And that happens sometimes.
I've not come across many 9s and 10s, but look, 2.5% of people are a 10. And if anyone is a 9 or a 10, I always find it useful to ask what percentage of people do you think would get a 10 on this? You know, if you think of 100 people, how many do you think? And the real answer, of course, is 2 to 3. And that kind of straight away will alert someone to perhaps their lack of awareness of it. Because if they are genuinely very mentally tough themselves, if they were to realize that actually 97.5% of people are not that mentally tough, they might think, okay, I'm the outlier here, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is interesting, because sometimes you say, how many other people do you think might get a 10 on this? And if they haven't quite understood the whole normative scoring thing, people will come on and say, 20, 30% of people, that kind of thing. So sometimes it's so easy just to be able to, pull out the distribution curve and say, look, here's where you are, and this is why people can't relate to you.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. I haven't done that, John, but that's a really good way of approaching it, because it's obvious. But
I guess in a way, Paul, you're more likely to come across 8, 9s and 10s if you tend to be working at senior level in organisations, because it's people with those sort of mental toughness profiles that tend to get to the top of organisations. A lot of our work these days is focused on the more mentally sensitive, who kind of often gets overlooked in the whole scheme of things, and they can almost feel that they're receiving a message that they're not going to be good enough and they've got to toughen up in some way. Our message in that is now changing, or has changed quite significantly. Again, it's about self-awareness. You can still be the best that you can be, but you need to understand who you are. Do you come across much scope for that in your work?
Absolutely. So you're right. Most of the people I would meet would be C-suite or aspiring C-suite. So there are quite a lot of people who I'm almost working on to make them less mentally tough, but there are also a significant number of people who are mentally sensitive and feel ashamed and somehow that they're already at a disadvantage because it's called a mental toughness test, not a mental sensitivity test. So once that's a good conversation to have, because I think once you can start to talk to somebody about, where they're positioned and maybe some of the strengths that they've got and that people who are at the other end of the scale may not have, then they start to feel a lot better about themselves. But they're naturally a 3 or a 4 because they worry about that sort of thing and they think about it deeply in many situations, or certainly the people I would meet. So it's certainly interesting to assist those people because they're a CFO or they're an HR director and they have got a higher level of anxiety perhaps than it is healthy for them to have or productive for them to have. So from my perspective, it's fantastic to be able to help them move the dial in certain ways.
And do you think sometimes, Paul, have you ever come across places where they might lose talented, sensitive people because of those issues? Sometimes I think there's a tendency to kind of have systemic issues within an organization that's causing a stress. And sometimes I would argue positive psychology could sometimes be guilty of suggesting that, well, it's on the individual to be better at managing stuff rather than, well, actually, maybe we recognize this person has some sensitivities towards being able to manage that situation and we need to put strategies in place as we might lose talent. Have you ever come across those kind of organizations where you might be losing really talented people because they're more sensitive and your culture, your system doesn't support them?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take when I was back at Ambition. So that was that was an organisation that I was leading, and our mantra was "No dickheads, no passengers." So,
why did you leave, Paul?
I should have been able to work that one out. I was going to get that comment, John. Thank you. So that was our mantra, and I think we probably fell into we had a strong culture around that, and I think there were times where probably people did leave because they felt they somehow didn't fit in. I felt towards the end of, as the company matured, we were a lot better at realising a diverse team, whether it's gender, whether it's nationality, and certainly, and I didn't realise it then, obviously, but in hindsight, people who were, and I had it picked as not sensitive and mentally tough, but more introverted, extroverted, perhaps, but people of different styles were beneficial to teams, and our teams generally were 5, 6, 7 people under a manager, and we had a whole number of those teams operating in different niches. So overall, I had to, I suppose, soften the style, but also make sure that individual managers and directors were cognizant of the fact that you wanted diversity to be more successful, you could be more profitable, and you could retain good people with that level of understanding and acceptance of the differences between people. And then, of course, this is 15 years ago, I had no concept of mental toughness, mental sensitivity, or even diversity. We were just big on culture and all thinking the same way. So I'm sure we were guilty of that, John. Absolutely. And if I probably will think of it tonight, I'm sure there are people I could think of who are good people who left because they didn't think there was a place for them, which is really sad because there would have been.
Thanks for sharing that as an anecdote, Paul. 'Cause I think it's so valuable, because it's easy when we start talking with hindsight of, here's what we think's right and wrong and things like that. But where I think it's valuable to sort of show how your own understanding of something develops is if we remember that we're all born ignorant. Ignorance is like, that's the baseline, right? We're all ignorant about everything until we become knowledgeable about it. And sometimes I think it takes a kind of reassurance in yourself to be able to recognize where those kind of ignorances are that every single person has. I have them, everyone has them. And then it's only with that hindsight, through recognizing, understanding different mental toughness isn't the only construct, of course, that can be valuable there. But I think the more you kind of get to understand those things, like you say, you've still got, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's definitely, inherently, there was some valuable, probably transformational leadership and togetherness and teamwork behind the no dickheads, no passengers thing, kind of bringing everyone together and making sure that accountability is no bad thing and stuff. But as you say, it's softening that. It's not necessarily saying, I've learned something new now, scrap everything I had.
No.
Going, okay, I'll keep some of those inherent values that are useful and workable, and maybe soften others that don't quite work.
Yeah.
So I think it's such a valuable insight.
Well, I say interestingly, but I found it interesting at the time, is that as we developed, we opened offices in Asia, quite a few offices in like Hong Kong, Singapore, KL, Tokyo. As we developed into what you might call a softer national style, I remember at one stage, and it was in Singapore, talking about no dickheads, no passengers. And I got a question from a local person asking me what a dickhead was. Not only was it intensely embarrassing, because I had to try and explain what a dickhead was, which to a Brit or an Aussie, you probably just realise, but not understand it, not surprisingly, for someone who's not brought up in either culture, you don't. So they're trying to make sense of this for a culture, cultural mantra. What is it? And I really gave a terrible answer and a poor answer. And after that, we changed it. In Asia. We changed the mantra to no egos, no passengers, because that was probably something that people could understand. But then I was sort of starting to realise exactly what you were talking about then, John, was that I had to somehow soften, or we had to soften the style and be a little more inclusive. People understood what no ego meant, but they didn't understand necessarily what no dickhead meant. And indeed, if they did, they were maybe threatened by it.
It's a really interesting conversation there, Paul. One of the things that we've found in recent times, especially with the development of the MTQPlus, is when you assess a large group of senior managers, and we've just done 120 in one organisation, they are always surprised that, yes, the average score is 6.5 compared to the global norm of 5.5. So they kind of say, oh, yeah, we are more mentally tough than average, until you point out that still 30%, maybe 40% of them have an overall mental toughness score that is below that average. And then you get them to understand that that's normal. And then when you get to look at some of the profiles for the people who've scored 8 or 9, and you say, by the way, your overall score is 8, but your score in emotional control is 3. Do you realize even you have mental sensitivity? You can get, I think that's some of the most really interesting conversations. You do break down a lot of barriers, because what you're presenting is that mental sensitivity is as normal as mental toughness. It's all about self-awareness and understanding yourself.
That's right. which I think is the power of the framework and the measure.
Yeah. Well, I think our view is that the measure is critically important because mental toughness is that invisible aspect of personality. We can see behavior, we can't see what somebody's thinking. And you've got to be able to kind of operationalize it in some way. So the framework helps you to do that, but the questionnaire helps you to get a feel for just how mentally tough or mentally sensitive you are. And that, once you can get that picture in your mind, you've got something to work with.
Yeah.
Paul, you talk about the journey to create awareness about the mental toughness concept, and we 101% in alignment with you. Where do you think we should go next? What should we be doing to kind of make more people aware?
I think we had another saying a long time ago, ambition, which was an inch wide, mile deep, which was the sort of AO, achievement orientation, come into play, and therefore that's a dual sort of approach. I think we want to go broad, so perhaps a mile wide, inch deep. So try and spread this globally, which I think you're doing a fantastic job of, both of you, with this podcast and many other initiatives. But I think also the opportunity might be just in terms of niches, so whether it's sports or education or leadership, or there are so many different niches where we don't know yet how powerful the measure and the framework can be, but I've no doubt it will be. So I think, where can we take this? I think there's so much ground that we can cover, and it's globally, but it's also in each particular location. It's so many different parts of business or society that we can explore.
Absolutely, Paul. I think Peter, John, and I are constantly surprised with the areas of application. We're literally just in conversation with a couple of clinical researchers, the doctors, they're not psychologists, who are applying it with parents of children who've been diagnosed with leukemia. And what they're finding is, by creating self-awareness about the mental toughness, introducing some development activity, they're reducing anxiety in the parents, which is impacting on the anxiety of the children, and they believe is actually impacting on the success of the treatment. I mean, I just find that mind-blowing.
It is. It's life-changing, isn't it? I think that's one of the exciting things for us, is that we can change lives with the measure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, a great point at which to stop. And I think we do need to bring you back. There's a lot more to explore. I think we need to get to some of your pithy statements. A few more of those.
There are.
But Paul, there's 2 or 3 things I think I'm taking away from the conversation. First one, when you opened up and you talk about the big setback in your career. So you point out that taking a big knock doesn't necessarily mean the end of the world, but you can not only survive the biggest knocks, but you can still thrive, as you're illustrating. And that mental toughness is a key element of that. The second area was, the key is to help people find their own solution, and that, of course, is a coaching message. And of course, mental toughness is a great framework, and the measures are a great help in enabling people to do that. So you brought that out really nicely. And then I really like the phrase you used, that this is one of your more acceptable pithy statements, when you said that, talking about the importance of real evidence-based practice, about which we are very proud. And you said that people want the truth and not the spin. And we are finding that more and more. I mean, John and I are bedeviled with the number of models and measures that are out there that have got no substance behind them at all, and yet people use them, willy-nilly. And then the final one is the importance of knowing yourself and where you are in terms of your mindset before setting off in a direction. So that's Alice in Wonderland thing. If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
That's right, exactly.
So I got a lot out of that conversation. I think a lot of people will.
Thank you, Doug. I think you summarised that really well, and I really enjoyed the conversation with yourself and John. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been great to talk.
Well, we know where to find you, Paul. I think there'll be some listeners who will listen to this and say, all right, I need to get in touch with this Paul Lyons guy because I need to learn a little bit more of these pithy statements that he comes out with. How can people get hold of you, Paul?
Thank you, Doug. 2 ways. First of all, LinkedIn, my profile, Paul Lyons. You'll see mental toughness practitioner. So that's the first way. The second way, email probably, which is paul@paullyons.com.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, Paul. That was brilliant.